Good morning and welcome to our virtual Pittsburgh reception. I'm Matt Smith, President of the Greater Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome all of you to today's event. We're going to hear from leaders on a wide range of infrastructure issues and transportation issues that are going to impact our region. I first want to extend our thoughts and prayers to the friends, family, as well as colleagues of the two Port Authority employees who recently passed away from COVID. We grieve their loss, and we recognize that many frontline workers have borne the brunt of this pandemic. I would note, since the start of the pandemic, 186 Port Authority employees have tested positive for COVID-19, including 127 since November 1st. 92 have recovered and been cleared to return to work, and 92 are recovering at home. And I just want to take a moment and reflect on their memory, as well as reflect, as I said, on the fact that our frontline workers, in so many cases, both with regard to their health, as well as with regard to what they do to keep our economy running, are truly on the front line of this pandemic. And we appreciate their activity, their efforts, as well as all the things that they do to keep us moving forward. So I did want to start the event out with that reflection. As our team huddled on what issue to focus on for this event, it became very clear. In our view, there is not a more unifying or a more important issue that the new Biden administration, the new Congress, and our state leaders must take on. And that is a must. That's not a should. They must take this issue on. There's not a more important issue they must take on than infrastructure. To be a vital, globally competitive region, we need a modern infrastructure system. Connectivity in all of its forms plays a central role in advancing our region's ability to thrive and unlock an economy with equity at the core. From business leaders to site selectors to talent, location decisions are being made based on infrastructure systems throughout metropolitan areas in the United States of America. Here in Pittsburgh, we know it touches our economy and quality of life in very important ways. For example, investments in our locks and dams ensure drinking water is available, recreational use of the waterways is possible, and goods and commerce can move up and down our inland waterway system. The current public transit system and our ability to build additional capacity through items like the Bus Rapid Transit Project, which you'll hear about later, are dependent on this sort of infrastructure investment, with a huge share of that funding necessarily coming from our partners in Washington, D.C. As well as the use of smart technology that our region is at the forefront of, those items are dependent on the federal share of that investment. The cost of inaction far outweighs the cost of action in this area. Investments to connect our people and goods through a modern, state-of-the-art, multimodal infrastructure system are strategic and stand to yield great returns for our region in terms of both economic growth and quality of place enhancement. On the flip side, inaction will most definitively lead to lost opportunity for our region and compound our economic growth and quality of life challenges. This is an issue where business, labor, nonprofits, and government all came together to rebuild Pennsylvania's crumbling infrastructure system with the passage of Act 89. And I would note the county executive's strong support for Act 89, and he was integral in that effort. And we need the same coordination to continue this progress. Our region is known to apply ingenuity and creativity to materialize big ideas. We need to leverage the same innovative spirit to transform our region's transportation infrastructure. Doing so will put us in the pole position in the competition for talent, economic growth, and creating a place that's truly for all. Today, we're going to hear from public sector leaders in a variety of contexts on this issue, and we are excited to first hear from public transit and regional leaders to talk about how this vital form of transportation connects people to opportunity. I'm now pleased to turn the program over to Rich Barkowski, who's been generous enough to sponsor this panel. Rich is the Executive Director of the Constructors Association of Western Pennsylvania. Rich, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning. I am the Executive Director of Constructors Association of Western Pennsylvania, a trade association representing over 200 heavy and highway construction and construction-related companies operating in the 33 counties of Western Pennsylvania. Our contractors are engaged in the construction of the region's highways, bridges, tunnels, airport runways, locks and dams, site excavation, and utility installation. My members believe that an easily accessible, well-connected, and robust transportation network is vital to improve the competitiveness, economic vitality, and quality of life throughout southwestern Pennsylvania. The pandemic has impacted so much this year, and the transportation program in Pennsylvania did not escape unharmed. Both PennDOT and the Turnpike experienced losses in revenue due to a large reduction in driving caused by COVID-19. As a result of reduced revenue, Pennsylvania's roads and bridge program has been negatively impacted. We look forward to working with the Greater Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce and the Allegheny Conference in the new year to achieve increased investment in transportation and other forms of infrastructure in Harrisburg and Washington, D.C. This morning, the Constructors Association is pleased to sponsor the first panel discussion, where we will hear from key public partners who will share their insights on future transportation and infrastructure priorities in our region. Thank you for taking the time to join us this morning, and I hope you find the panel engaging and informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. We appreciate you helping to kick off this panel and for not only your sponsorship, but your partnership over the years. You and your organization have been a leading voice in the transportation and infrastructure space, and we know how much this topic means for your members, not even in just the long-term economic growth, but the fact that so many family-sustaining jobs are reliant on transportation investment. So it's great to have you join us. Welcome again to everyone, and thank you for being here. I am Jen Beer, Vice President of Government Affairs for the Greater Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce, the advocacy affiliate for the Allegheny Conference. And once again, just a thank you to all of our sponsors who have made these virtual panels and meetings possible, and particularly to this panel sponsor, the Constructors Association of Western Pennsylvania. Just a few housekeeping items before we jump into our discussion this morning. As always, we design these panels to be interactive and to allow you, the attendees, to be able to have your questions answered. So please do utilize the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we will do our best to get to as many questions for the panelists as possible. For this panel, we will be discussing the vital role that transportation and infrastructure investment plays in our Pittsburgh region, and how important investments in many different areas and modes can help better connect everyone in our region to opportunity. So without further delay, I'd like to bring on each of our panelists one at a time. I will ask them to turn on their camera and mic, give a few brief comments on how their work or organization views transportation and infrastructure as a way to create opportunity for all in our region. So I'd first like to welcome and start with our County Executive, Rich Fitzgerald. I'm sure he needs no introduction to those joining us, but I will say that the County Executive has been one of our region's biggest champions and advocates on a variety of issues, but especially transportation and infrastructure. He's been a great partner to our organization and a true leader on ensuring a balance between a strong economy and a strong quality of life. So County Executive, would you like to offer a few introductory remarks?
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate that. And thank you, Matt, for really outlining the importance of what we're doing. And also, Rich Burkowski, thank you for sponsoring today. You know, obviously, how things changed starting in March when things got changed, shut down or changed, or however you want to say it. But the needs are still there. The needs were there back in March, and the needs are still there now regarding our infrastructure investment. We need to connect people to the jobs and the opportunities that are there. We've got to create the type of efficient infrastructure and transportation system that allows companies to thrive and grow and succeed here and draw more companies here to create more opportunities and more jobs for the people in this region. We talked about the locks and dams, the importance of using our waterways to make that occur. Our rail system to again take heavy products, raw materials in and finished goods out. And then the roadway connections that can also connect intermodally to these facilities. But then how do we get people to these opportunities that are there? If the jobs are being created in one part of the region, but the people are living in another part of the region, how do we connect people to these opportunities? Because equity needs to be a big part of it. And when we talk about connections, connections aren't just necessarily physical connections, but they're virtual connections. Many of our rural neighbors don't have the broadband and the 5G and the connections to be able to even have a meeting like we're having right now, virtually, to be connected. Things have accelerated as far as remote work, remote stay-at-home work, those type of things. We've got to make sure we invest throughout the region, throughout the 10-county region, to make sure that people are connected and have opportunities throughout this region. I look forward to working with the conference, working with our friends in the labor community, our universities, our foundations, all the groups that come together to make these things happen. But there can be no delay in doing this. I think Matt said it very well. The cost of doing nothing is probably the highest cost of all. So we've got to figure out which way and which projects to put forward, and then how to pay for them. We're obviously going to need help from our friends at the federal level, the federal government. We've been waiting on an infrastructure bill that, quite frankly, didn't happen over the last few years. We're hoping with a new administration and a new Congress coming in, they will get on that, right away. Also, our friends at the state, that I know the governor's been pushing for this, and hopefully he can get some help in the legislature. But all of us locally as well. There's going to have to be some local match that occurs on revenues that to pay for the type of infrastructure investment that we have. So in my mind, it's a win-win on both sides. It's a win on all the people that we put to work in building out the infrastructure, but then it's also a win in that we become more competitive and create more jobs in the future by having an efficient transportation infrastructure utility system for all. So I look forward to the questions and discussing this with the mayor and Catherine regarding what they see in transit and in a municipality level. So look forward to all of that, and thank everybody for participating, and let's work together.
Thank you. Thank you, County Executive. It's now my pleasure to welcome Catherine Kellerman, the Executive Director or Chief Executive Officer, of the Port Authority of Allegheny County, which is our public transit system serving the Pittsburgh region. Well, Catherine, I guess I'd say is still relatively new. I can already attest to her very robust community engagement efforts and her partnership. She and I have already had the opportunity to join together in some meetings with our legislative leaders on shared priorities. She's been to numerous chamber and conference events, which is greatly appreciated. Catherine, I also just want to echo Matt's sentiments and offer our sincerest condolences to you, the Port Authority, on your recent losses. Our thoughts are with you, all of your employees, and certainly all of our frontline workers that are putting their lives on the line at this time. So thank you for being with us, Catherine.
Jen, thank you. Thank you for those comments. Also to Matt, thank you for acknowledging the, we normally joke that this year has felt like 5 years. In the past couple of days, it felt extremely long for all the members of our Port Authority family. And to Matt's comments, I think this really puts into sharp relief that while many of us are in our basements or homeschooling, the economy is going forward with folks who are showing up every single day. I also want to thank the county executive for his leadership in this. I feel individually like I've been here forever, but it was just 3 short years ago that Rich said, hey, this is a place that we need to grow, and why don't you come up from Tampa? So thank you for that opportunity. And also, I think we need to point out that when we had Senator Matt Smith, he was a big ally with ATU and local investors and local businesses, making sure that we get support for Act 89 and transportation funding. So having this kind of strong support makes our life much easier. And thank you also for our sponsors talking about infrastructure today. So going fast, coming right out of the box. Infrastructure investment builds jobs while we are building things, it builds jobs while we maintain, and it keeps our jobs moving. Whether we are talking about continuing to turn Pittsburgh into the place that will attract people from around the country now that folks can work remotely and they want to come here for quality of life, or we're talking about the folks who are taking transit because they are half of America that don't have a driver's license, or 10% of the families in the country that don't have access to a car. Transportation is what makes our community happen. All these fantastic things are useless if you can't get to them. The type of investment that we see in other cities is very focused on transportation. It's not that people want to build next to a train station in Dallas, for instance, but that was a catalyst for investment, which is increasing our property tax values. Why is that important as well? Being close to a Port Authority busway or to our train system actually increases your property value anywhere from 6 to 20%. And annually, Port Authority's additional value in property adds another $100 million in ad valorem to our municipalities, to our county, to our state. Put this on top of the fact that Allegheny County is 9% of the state's population, but 12% of the general fund contribution. And you can see just by increasing this property value, we don't just move our city, we move our county, we are an engine for the state. So it is, I'm biased, but it's a no-brainer to continue to make this investment. So I look forward to this conversation today about where this investment can happen, while we are mindful of the fact that, what we all thought was a 3-week pandemic or a 4-week lockdown has now been 9 months. And we're dealing with a whole bunch of workforces that have spent this 9-month window doing exceptional work. We have 7 or 8 months ahead of us, and how can we support them so they can come out of this not just resilient, but thriving and able to continue to participate in this great local economy. So again, thank you for your time today, and I'll turn it back over to you, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, I'd like to introduce the Honorable Marita Garrett. Mayor Garrett, please feel free to, there you go, turn on your mic and camera. Mayor Garrett is the 10th mayor of Wilkinsburg, a role she assumed in 2018. She's been working hard, even before that time, though, to advocate on behalf of Wilkinsburg and support them in a variety of ways. I'd also be remiss, Mayor, if I didn't congratulate you for your recent 2020 local government, was it the Governor's Award?
Oh yeah, thank you.
Excellence. Congratulations on that. And Mayor, please feel free to give some opening remarks.
Yes, thank you again, Jen. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Matt and the Chamber, and also Rich of the Construction Associates for sponsoring. I'm really happy to be here. And, it's really great to see that these conversations are still going on virtually. I feel like 2020 has definitely been the year, or the word of the year is probably pivot. Either pivot, reroute, all those types of things. So I know each and every one of us on here have had to do that. And especially within a community such as Wilkinsburg, where, transportation, our infrastructure is so important, yet during this global pandemic, really the heightened need to address the basic immediate needs of our constituents. About 18% of Wilkinsburg residents live in poverty. So one of those main concerns, in addition to making sure our residents are connected to the necessary resources to, alleviate as much of a burden to their daily life, is also making sure that they have some of those immediate needs. So, you see an increase of the food distributions, clothing distributions, the work of the Free Store Wilkinsburg really increased, and, mask, and, like echoing Catherine and County Executive, when this first started, didn't really have, an end date, thinking that, okay, maybe a few months, but this is very much a way of life. And so one of the things that, you kind of have to find a little bit of gratitude is how all of these partners have come together to really work on keeping our communities connected, and knowing that, 2020, yes, this year is almost over, but the pandemic is still going on. So continuing to look at innovative solutions as to, okay, how are we going to talk about infrastructure in 2021? How are we going to make sure maybe, someone who needs to get tested across to another portion of the county can get there safely? So it's really important that we are continuing to have these conversations. And I'm excited to work with all of you and hear from my fellow panelists, even on some of those solutions to the problems that we are facing. But thank you again for having me this morning.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, well, we're going to kick off the discussion with a little bit of a look to the future. When speaking narrowly about transportation infrastructure, we typically think roads, bridges, transit, waterways, and these modes are crucial to grow our economy and attract investment to our region. But especially recently, supporting all different types of mobility via these modes will help aid our economic recovery, as our work to support them can help to assist our most vulnerable communities' efforts to survive and thrive. So can each of you touch on what you believe should be our region's top mobility and accessibility priorities as we hopefully soon start to turn the corner on the pandemic and look to our region's future? So let's start with the county executive.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I think the one thing I think we see in this region right now is a tremendous amount of growth and a tremendous amount of companies who want to invest here and want to grow here. And we see it in certain regions, and the market is going to drive an awful lot of that. One of those regions is the innovation district that occurs around our universities who continue to spin out companies, whether it's in robotics or life sciences or information technology or various amount of things that companies that we didn't even know the name of 10 years ago that are coming here, growing here, and expanding here. And those places are obviously places like Oakland, Uptown, Lawrenceville, the Strip District, downtown, the North and South Shores. So the companies are going to grow there. How do we get people that don't necessarily live in proximity to where those jobs are? How do we get those folks there? So connecting that, making it easier for people not only to drive there, but people to use transit to get there. That's a big part of what the bus rapid transit, the BRT system that we've been working on literally for a decade allows us to do. Not just the folks who live in those communities, but even folks who might live 50 miles away in surrounding counties. How can they get to those locations easily? And then we see the airport corridor coming online when the cracker plant in Beaver County comes online. What neighborhood 91 is becoming out in the 9,000 acres of land that we have in the airport corridor. Logistics that are happening out there. We saw that Amazon just put over 1,000 jobs in a hub, a logistics hub out in Findlay Township. So we can see these areas of the region that are accelerating with job growth and investment. So how do we get people that don't necessarily live there out to those locations? And I think that's a challenge we're going to have to continue to work on. Again, a lot of it will be transit. We can use rail, we can use river, all the different things that we have, but we've got to be smart in how we invest. And then we've got to figure out how to pay for it. And I think that's also a conversation that we can't necessarily shy away from. But the opportunities on a very macro level are as good as they've ever been in this region over the last couple of decades. But we've got to make sure that people who have been left behind and may live remotely from these opportunities, we need to connect those folks.
Catherine, do you want to build on any of that?
I would love to. So jumping on the county executive's point, yes, we do have to talk about how to afford this, but you know what? Let us dream big. Let us swing for the fences. We have a legacy system. We have a fantastic foundation. We have great land use in so many of our neighborhoods that have been built up around previous transit investments. And much of our city grew up before we started living through our cars. So we've already got these great livable areas. It's time to invest in them. And again, think broadly. So yes, we talk a lot, since I started, we've talked so much about getting a train out to the airport. What about a modern streetcar system connecting the strip? It's on the same gauge. What about not just an expansion of the East Busway, but a reimagining of how that busway can interact with our communities? Can we open it up? Can we improve these pedestrian connections? Use that footprint and investment of the East Busway to catalyze more improvements in an area. And I will use Wilkinsburg as an example. Part of our dream is, instead of just a shelter by a parking lot at a park and ride, let us put a facility there so we can host farmers markets. I've done this in other agencies. This is nothing which is uncommon, but right now, if we did something like that, people would be stuck walking through a parking lot and trying to interface with how to get to whatever they would desire to market. It's not very friendly. We can change this, build this local economy, help these local contractors and small businesses. In the past 3 years, we made a concerted effort toward expanding our local investment, get these firms investing, and then have a place where folks can come together as part of their transit system. And we're taking the East Busway further out. So that's just one level of the kind of investment we're looking at. I think also standing in very sharp relief right now this year is, we're in sort of this post-COVID world of equity, as opposed to this pre-COVID idea of diversity and encouraging our neighborhoods. When we look at the Port Authority system, we have to acknowledge that when we have converted, so many of our old streetcar lines into bus stops and bus lines, we've built on what was acceptable in the past. We've built on redlining. We've built on where neighborhoods were and were not allowed to connect. And how do we conquer that today? How do we make sure that if somebody is working close to Moon Township, where so many jobs are popping up, but they were born and raised in Monroeville and they don't want to leave their family ties behind, we have a role to play in making that a quick and seamless connection and facilitating someone's ability to live the life that they want and not the life that transit forces them to live. Specifically and concretely, let's look within our area, but we've got our bus rapid transit corridor coming online with significant improvements in 22 and wrapping up in 23. This is an opportunity to put in transit, which is well connected, which is easy and accessible to get to, where you get the benefits of rail. So you pay ahead of time, it's quick, there aren't cars in front of you, but with the flexibility to serve our neighborhoods and not have to take out big swaths for dedicated right of way. So we're very excited about this, but where can BRT go next? Do we take our busways into BRT? Where are these other connections? How are we connecting the airport seamlessly to downtown, to the strip, to Oakland, to the incubators everywhere? So we are currently working on our system plan, our long range plan. And so this will be talking about, where are we going to be in 25 years? What are the values that we're incorporating to get to that? And how do we break it out into bite-sized pieces? Everything from converting your local bus stop to be at least an 8x10 concrete pad with somewhere that you can sit and get electronic information, to thinking about what are our downtown and interurban hubs where vehicles can come together, passengers can get off and stretch their legs, and our operators can get off and get a break. So I don't want to say the sky's the limit, but let us dream big together and then have these conversations about funding. We know what it's like in this region when Port Authority is trying to be on the cheap. We've seen the cuts in 2007. We saw them in 2011. We know what it's like trying to engage this workforce if we're not doing commendations and recognition. We deserve better. So let's define what that's going to be and let's go get the money.
Well said. How about Mayor Garrett? Your thoughts on future priorities for Wilkinsburg, maybe in particular, but also the region?
Yeah, so I love the idea of dreaming big, because we see where it gets us when we, yes, so all applause, because we see where it gets us when we don't. So with that, in specifics to just looking at Wilkinsburg and beyond, as I had shared, 2020 has been that year of really exposing some of the things that have worked, that haven't worked. And one of the things about, Wilkinsburg, our geographic location, our proximity to the city of Pittsburgh, and especially to the downtown, is, amazing. And we have so much potential. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done thus far to, build up our main streets, build up our busway corridor, build up some of the infrastructure, especially making paving within Wilkinsburg a crucial a crucial point. Again, connecting, even though we're only 2.2 square miles, we are very densely populated. So really making sure all residents can get from all sides of Wilkinsburg and beyond. Yet in that same course of dreaming big and thinking innovative, we are actually exploring really what the sustainability of Wilkinsburg looks like moving forward. And that could be, an increase in partnerships with the city of Pittsburgh. That's been
They
proven
can't
to
see
be
you.
very,
Come here.
that's been
Can't
very
you- If I get up.
cost effective, for our borough as well. Our school district has partnered with Pittsburgh Public. And so really looking at what would that look like for our government to partner or merge with the city of Pittsburgh. It's one of those taboo discussions that, especially in a county with 130 municipalities that, no one wants to discuss head on, but yet this fragmentation at some point, I think especially in this year has highlighted that it can't continue on in that way. So if we're really looking about sustainability, regardless if we are in a pandemic or not, and really what's for the best of our region or residents, in this case for Wilkinsburg, looking at what that looks like. And, it's interesting because a lot of people who I encounter sometimes thinks that Wilkinsburg is already a neighborhood of the city of Pittsburgh. So, even explaining, no, we're actually our own municipality. But when we're talking about, this role of infrastructure and, residents, community members not feeling left out, there's a lot of program, especially with the housing fund, that many of our residents could have used during this time, but it only serviced the communities that the URA services, which is the city of Pittsburgh. So really, on a sense, reimagining municipalities, reimagining infrastructure, and all those things align with it. So that is one of the main priorities within Wilkinsburg that I'm sure more people will be hearing about in the near future.
Thank you, Mayor. And it's obviously clear that each of you have thought very long and hard about the future here, and we look forward to partnering with you on these endeavors. Catherine, this next question will be for you. Even before we knew anything about COVID-19, we did know that we were likely going to have to work closely with you, your team, the county executive, many of our regional and state partners to address the looming transportation and specifically transit funding crisis via the diminishing turnpike payments that's bubbling up in Harrisburg. Even as of late, I think it's our understanding that the Turnpike will have to borrow some money to make its overdue transit payments to PennDOT to get the quarterly payments back on schedule. I know we've had some great legislative, we have some great legislative champions in and around Pittsburgh that will be supportive of finding ways to remedy this situation. But sometimes it's harder to get legislators who represent more rural districts on board. So maybe can you start off by commenting on the situation overall, but also offer any thoughts or suggestions on how we can discuss the importance of this issue with public officials in all geographic areas of the state and region?
Well, actually, let me start off by apologizing. I thought I was off camera, and my 7-year-old wants to build the Lego Advent Calendar X-Wing fighter for today. If he brings it to me, I'll share it with everyone. So I apologize for that. This is a great question. How do we talk to legislators from, Luzerne or Center or all these other counties that have not been to Southwestern Pennsylvania, and they don't really see the value of transit in Southwestern Pennsylvania to them. They don't connect the dots. So when we have been meeting with these legislators and when we've been working with our message, we hit a lot of the economic development points that I mentioned earlier, that, we being close to transit just there is generating more money. So our cities are not asking Harrisburg for funding for schools or for law enforcement. They're getting this money locally. Also, that we're a net contributor to the state for the general fund. Every dollar that comes into Port Authority is $2 to $3 brought back into Allegheny County. So money comes into Port Authority. And to be clear, I'm a broken record, but we're not asking for anybody else's money. We're asking for our money back from Harrisburg. This is not unusual for legacy systems, because when we were set up, we were recognized as such a central part to Commonwealth economies. And you see this in Maryland, you see this in New Jersey, not to compare us to Jersey. You see this in New York. You see this throughout the Northeast, and also, you know, in parts of Ohio, places where transit created the city. I mean, great example of this is in Chicago. Chicago would not exist without the streetcar. After the Great Fire in the 1880s, it was illegal to build homes which were not brick in Chicago, but all the new immigrants to Chicago could not afford brick homes. They could go right outside the city limits, though, and afford frame homes. So developers built the streetcar lines so the workers could buy their own homes and come back into the city. I mean, transit is such a vital component of these towns, and these towns were such vital components to the state. We are structured that way. So again, how do we talk to these legislators about making sure that we can continue to feed the economy, feed them locally? We have to be able to demonstrate this fact. So we've done a lot with economic impact studies. I'd say also COVID, again, a broken record. COVID didn't break things. COVID showed us what was broken. And you could apply this to a whole bunch of areas that we've all been talking about this year. And in many spaces, these smaller cities might not look at what can transportation do for them. But during the lockdown and during the summer, they have seen how their small providers have delivered food to folks who are at home or folks who could not get out because of stay-at-home orders to get to produce, or they couldn't connect to them, or they've seen the vital role that transportation plays. Again, half of the US does not have a driver's license, and that's not all people under 16 and over a certain age. It's people who choose not to. It's people who, instead of spending $10,000 a year on a car, are spending money in their local economy or sending their kids to a different school or moving to a different neighborhood. So highlighting that information has been helpful in these conversations. I will tell you also, when we're talking transportation funding, Act 89 was designed to cover us for 10 years, but by design, by the end of the 10-year window, Act 89, which has been investing in our capital, was going to be used for operations for Port Authority. So the dollar amount right now, which is $75 million of state money coming from the Turnpike, put together with a local match of $15 million, that set money, that $90 million, was never going to be enough to write us off into the future. Within a few years after Act 89 sunsets, that dollar amount would already be going completely to operating. We would have to have this conversation regardless of COVID. COVID exacerbates this. The county funds us through a drink tax. I'll just leave that out there. And as much as I want your money, please don't go out drinking. But what does that mean for funding? Our ridership is down, which means our fares are down. And we're in this weird situation that on the one hand, we are not a utility in which you pay for consumption of something which is that's subsidized for you. We're much more like a fire system or a police system or a library or a park, an amenity that you can't do without that makes life happen, right? We need to be out there in a certain level of coverage. And when 20% of our budget is coming from fares and that comes down, we have this sort of Pyrrhic choice of, do we pull service off the street to save money, but then people can't get to work. All but one of our routes serves either a grocery store or a medical facility. We've been working with UPMC and Allegheny Health and Highmark to identify where their people live and where they go to work so we can make that connection happen. And any constriction of us is going to cripple this economy as it goes on, as we try to move on into the future. So whether it's COVID relief now, and here's my blatant plug, please give your support to your legislators, specifically make sure our senators are hearing from you that transit and infrastructure are major investments and need funding. But beyond that, we need to have these conversations of long-term sustainable funding to grow the system that our region deserves.
Great. County Executive or Mayor, did you want to add anything there?
Go ahead, Mayor. I'll let you go, and then I'll go after you.
No, I think Catherine really just hit the point on everything. Right now, kind of when she said their fares are low, real estate payments in Wilkinsburg are low. And right now over, like 50% of our properties are tax delinquent. So looking at revenue streams to sustain the borough, while also, it's kind of that, kind of handling on both sides. So sustaining the borough, also wanting to help your local businesses and your residents at all all the points. So really, you know, the need for funding, it's so crucial at this point. But again, I think that's why we're discussing, okay, what are some of these innovative solutions that we can do to move forward, given that we are having limited funding. We don't know the next stimulus relief package or when it will be released or how much it'll actually be. So trying to work from within the roles of within. But that's all I really have to add on that point.
Yeah, let me add on to that. I think, and Mayor Garrett mentioned something earlier on about, you know, the structure of having 130 different municipalities, and I know that's probably a discussion for a separate day. But the COVID pandemic has exposed a lot of those the haves and have-nots and some of the struggles that communities like Wilkinsburg and some of our Mon Valley and Allegheny Valley and Ohio Valley communities have shown. I think the one good thing that I take away optimistically, and Catherine alluded to this, we have great bones in things that are already there. 3 major busways, the East Busway that connects all the way out into Rankin and Swissville, that can certainly be part of an economic development strategy for places like Wilkinsburg, Homewood, North Point Breeze, connecting folks to those opportunities. The South Busway all the way, you know, out into Overbrook and connecting folks in those communities. The West Busway that goes all the way, you know, through Crafton and out to Carnegie and in neighborhoods again that to build upon a major investment that was made many years ago that we have in this community, again, along with a rail system that also goes out into the South Hills and then you know, connects over to the North Shore. And when we saw that North Shore connector that'll be 9 years old in a few months, when we cut the ribbon on that, that is so unlocked development in that area. If you recall that years ago, it was nothing but a sea of asphalt and parking lots. And since that connection was made, we saw a tremendous amount of private investment that came into the community for folks over there and connecting a lot of jobs. So we have a lot of good infrastructure that we can build upon. You know, Catherine also mentioned the fact that while this community has only 9% of the state's population, we generate 12% of the state's income. And that's largely because the 2 largest population centers in the region are the 2nd and 3rd biggest in the state, downtown Pittsburgh and Oakland. Connecting those 2 with the BRT is going to unlock even more development opportunities in the Hill District, in Uptown, in places that have been left behind. So we don't necessarily have to start from ground zero in a lot of our infrastructure investment. We can build upon things that are already there and then connect to where the market is taking us. So I mean, I'm optimistic that we can do this, but it really is about us, you know, kind of working with our officials at all levels to continue this investment.
Great. Thank you all for very great answers on that question. I'm having a lot of questions come in, which fortuitously go to my next question anyway, which is going to be directed first to Mayor Garrett. So changing directions just a little bit, we'd like to talk about connectivity infrastructure via broadband and 5G. And we know that the current COVID crisis has obviously shown the importance of broadband and connectivity for all areas, as we know, school, work, public safety, healthcare, and everyday mobility options. And we know that to have ourselves in a good position to compete economically as we recover, having 5G infrastructure in place will be very helpful for that, as well as helping capacity, I know, in very urban and dense areas. So Mayor, can you offer your thoughts on what you see as the current situation in our community, and maybe also touch on your vision for what better connectivity could mean for Wilkinsburg in particular, but maybe also the region?
Absolutely. So again, we see the digital divide this year. Once stay-at-home orders became enforced, once virtual learning or remote learning took place, you immediately saw that divide of who had access to Wi-Fi, who was able to log on here, who all of those things, work from home capabilities, those who may have jobs where you have to go in and maybe there's not a drive or connection for you to do that. But ultimately, what I see throughout this year is that, this virtual connectivity also plays a direct role into our public safety and keeping us safe at home, so that if we're able to do as much possible as home, which there is the need for 5G broadband region-wide. I'll definitely say, obviously, Wilkinsburg, yet regionally wide, because these issues weren't just limited to our borough. Thankfully, we have some community organizations that did their best to try to fill that gap. So our library, Wilkinsburg Public Library, did a great job trying to get mobile hotspots out there. The school district, I believe, had a partnership with Comcast where free internet was offered, but again, to the level of what broadband. I mean, I can even go across to another part of Wilkinsburg and maybe my service isn't as good. So it also ties into that equity issue. And for us to, and this is, I believe, the issue of what we're seeing going on, just in this pandemic overall, is that it's not equitable. So some people, yes, they can stay home, they can work, they connect, they can have the latest version of Zoom, all of these things, but other people who may not even have internet may not be able to get on a conversation or call like we're having right now to connect. So there's that gap that needs to be addressed. And, even with some of these internet providers offering the discounted rates or even offering, free months here and there, that's just really a Band-Aid solution. We need to look at and really implement 5G broadband all across the board. I think then that's when you'll see an increase of people, being able to be more remote, that don't have to try to chance it. Oh, maybe let me come in the office for this, or I need to go to pick up this item, that literally the internet will be at the access of everyone's hand. And really that type of connectivity equity is a tool for social justice. Excuse my 3 dogs.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Well, county executive, let's ask you, in terms of equity, how would you see a balance between maybe 5G and broadband?
Well, I agree with the mayor. We talk about, connecting people physically, obviously through transportation. We spent a lot of time talking about that. But the digital divide is every bit as difficult and keeps people from the opportunities that need to happen. And it really touches on so many aspects of life, not just the job market or connecting like we are in a meeting like this, but public safety, health information, education, how are kids getting the teaching that they need in school. So, communication and information connectivity is so important. And it's a big part of all the investment that we need to make. Again, companies, don't always have everything physically with all their workers being in here, but they need to be able to connect to their workforce wherever they may be. So we really do have to invest again in those areas that make sense, because I not to get too political, but we see such a divide in this country, that happens politically, and I think a lot of it is the fact that some folks in areas that aren't necessarily in the urban connectivity are disconnected, and if we can connect people through 5G and broadband, I think that may also go a long way in bringing us together as a nation and as a community.
Yep, thank you. And Catherine, I know the Port Authority in this space has stepped up significantly. You've built out mobile fare payments, you have True Time, passenger Wi-Fi on buses, a whole host of upgraded technology. Anything in particular you'd like to highlight or add here?
Well, first, I want to say shout out to Jeffrey Devlin and the IT team, which has made magic happen in a really short amount of time. And they've kept us also all plugged in while we're remote. So couldn't do it without this great group of people. One thing I'd like for us to remember is when we are adding this network, absolutely, let's get this connection to folks, because all the tools we're building, again, are useless if people can't access them, as we're looking forward to not just online fare payment, but sort of, the vision of one-stop shopping where you can plan your trip, you can pay your fare, you can just flash your cards from X to Y. We do need to remember that we have a component of our ridership that don't have access to bank accounts. So let's continue to make the investment that they can interface with us, whether it's supporting prepaid cards or putting in a way that we can make it easier for them to access this technology. So it's not just the broadband. Let's remember that, some of the most basic things of tying this to your bank account or tying this to your access point, we should be sure that we're paying attention to that as well.
Thank you. Okay, I have one more quick last question for me, and then I know there's a lot of questions coming in from our audience. But looking and turning our attention to funding that comes from the federal government, I know a lot of what we're talking about today does stem from what the federal government can provide. And I know County Executive, you're one of our strongest supporters through our Southwest Congressional Delegation there. Real quick, any insight into a larger infrastructure package from the federal government, possibly early next year?
Well, I know we have a lot of support in doing that. And I think we've got support, bipartisan support. The dean of our delegation, Mike Doyle, Congressman Doyle, leads the Pennsylvania delegation, obviously has a lot of influence with Speaker Pelosi. Congressman Connor Lamb is on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. It's already brought us some benefits in getting some a build grant at the airport to help us with cargo distribution, those type of things, again, creating jobs and helping with the infrastructure. So I do sense that there's a broad coalition of support between the business community, the labor community. I know President-elect Biden, that's been one of the things he has talked about, and I'm sure that's one of the first things he's going to approach Congress about. And I know Governor Wolf has also had his system in place that he would like to move forward. So hopefully we can reach some consensus on making that happen over the next year, because again, we've outlined just a portion of the benefits that would come to this region and this nation if we do invest in infrastructure and continue to make ourselves more competitive as a country, but also create equity for folks who have been left behind.
Thank you. And Mayor Garrett, can I ask you specifically on this part, how does the funding for roads and bridges have an impact on a community like Wilkinsburg? And maybe even sort of keeping with that sustainability thread that you mentioned earlier, how does the public transit as well play into keeping a place like Wilkinsburg sustainable?
It has a huge impact because majority of our funding that comes for us to be able to pave our roads, take care of our infrastructure, parks is usually from state and federal funding. So especially this year, as funding has been reallocated as it should be to specific COVID-19 needs, that also puts Wilkinsburg in a lurch, because usually by now we would have probably had GEDF funding, or I know the CITF has been sunsetted with the GEDF, and there's limited rounds and the rounds are shorter. So trying to figure out, okay, presenting the best package we can for chances to, for that to be granted. Now, thankfully, we have, in addition to County Exec being a great advocate for Wilkinsburg, we have State Senator Jay Costa, who's been absolutely amazing. And then Congressman Doyle, we're in his district. So they've definitely been advocates for communities such as Wilkinsburg. But, even as we're looking at this year's budget, really having to, you hope for the best, but expect the worst. And that's kind of where it is, because given this year, not sure if there will be any federal, state additional funding for 2021. So what does that again look like from pulling from what limited resources we have within our municipality to, stay on top of those infrastructure, especially for us, 18% of our properties, our houses, housing stock is vacant and blighted. So as we're looking at the daily, which also everything's cyclical, right? Because that ties into a public safety issue. So as we see these abandoned properties, which are, actively collapsing in front of our eyes, the lack of resources to effectively address that. So recognizing that, trying to, but again, really grateful for the leadership that we have in our region to be that voice piece to those in the state level and also federal. But it's kind of that you're waiting for one hand to drop and you just have to be as proactive as you can be. But it has definitely made a huge impact, and especially when we're looking in capacity of what we can do within our borough. Some of our DPW team has gotten shorter. There's some positions that aren't being filled, which directly affect, to really directly affect the livelihood of our residents here.
Thank you. And Catherine, I assume the federal package is something that you're interested in watching carefully as well.
Absolutely. A couple different things. First, our first round of CARES Act will get us through this fiscal year. I saw one of the questions was how close is Port Authority to the breaking point? We've had really prudent financial management. So we know we've got this fiscal year, but we will need additional funding next year to keep us from having to make some tough decisions of how low does the bank account go? How much risk do we expose ourselves to? And how do we serve this community? For federal infrastructure package, absolutely it needs to be updated, but also newer funding mechanisms. Using a gas tax is really not the most effective way for us to fund transportation here. And so we'll be very, very cautiously watching that. And while I can still say anything, because I guess we're winding down, wear a mask. I have to stress to you, wear a mask. So wear a mask and let's support infrastructure.
Great, thank you. One question that I think I can kind of try to work in from the audience and maybe start with Mayor Garrett, but the role of transportation and infrastructure on your ability to recruit business and residents to Wilkinsburg. You touched on this a little bit, but anything more specifically you'd like to add there?
Yeah, to add to that, again, our location. So, Wilkinsburg, because again of how close we are to the city of Pittsburgh, but not even that. Again, we have 2 stations on the East Bestway, Hamnet Station, Wilkinsburg Station. Our main district, our main streets are very walkable, pedestrian friendly. So that is definitely a pro as to why people seek Wilkinsburg. If especially when we're talking about those who leaving East Liberty for numerous reasons, why Wilkinsburg is kind of next on their list, or seems okay to move to residentially, is because you're still getting those same amenities as if living in the East End neighborhoods of the city of Pittsburgh, but overall at a lower cost, or so we would think, but then again, you have years like 2020, which highlight what we can't do. And so, but again, going back to what our potential is in Wilkinsburg, is we are really fortunate that our East Busway is right there and is a great connector to not only the city of Pittsburgh, but also other neighborhoods in the East as well. Whereas I know it's not as accessible as, say, in the Mon Valley, or even, the further municipality east you go, the further away you're from the East Busway. So you may not have that direct access. So Wilkinsburg, I definitely will stress, benefits from having the 2 stations on the East Busway and being so closely connected to the center of Pittsburgh.
Great. Okay, well, we are winding down. I know there were quite a few questions in our Q&A, so thank you all to the audience. But real quick, a final question, or maybe just opportunity for each of you to final comments, or any mode or mobility option of connectivity that we didn't touch on today. I know in the chat, water and sewer was mentioned, so let us not forget that important piece of transportation and infrastructure. But just to go around, any final comments or discussion topics let's start with the county executive.
Yeah, thanks, Jen, and thanks really putting this together. It's a very important topic and discussion that all of us need to be engaged in. And the more people we can bring together. This is one of those things where we do need to work together. It is a challenge that we have in this community, but one thing I know is when we do work together, we can meet these challenges and figure out the best way forward. So let's continue working together, especially once we get on the other side of this pandemic, so that we can continue to move forward. But investment, we need to do it. Thanks.
Yep. Catherine?
Everything that Rich just said, but I also want to remind, I'm very limited in focus is Allegheny County and what we do here. We are part of this bigger region, and I'm really excited to have Vince Valdez out at the SPC. So we're making these investments. We're having these great regional conversations about how all of us work together. Infrastructure is a great example of a rising tide lifts all boats, but we have to make sure that we do everything we can to create the situation where that tide can lift, and that's going to come down to infrastructure funding. Thank you again for pulling it together and letting me join the panel. And here's to a great first 3 years in Pittsburgh and many more to come.
Thank you, Catherine. And Mayor Garrett?
I just want to stress that we cannot go back. So, again, 2020 highlighted all the inequities and the things that aren't working. So we really have to take this opportunity to strengthen all of the things: infrastructure, transportation, access to education, broadband connectivity, all of those things that maybe have been pushed to the side. We can no longer do that. So really recognizing the opportunity that 2020 has presented to truly make this whole region sustainable, and kind of kicking off or wrapping up with what Catherine said at the beginning, dreaming big, the sky is the limit. So we know what didn't work. Let's try to just go for all the things that we can work. If we aim, for the moon, obviously we'll land for the sky. So let's do this. We're all in it together. And again, thank you for having me this morning. And thank you to all for joining us as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And before I do close, I do want to just make sure I acknowledge, we did have a few elected officials, and you mentioned Vincent Valdez. I believe he was participating as an attendee, State Representative Valerie Gatos, and I think we had the PennDOT District Director, Cheryl Moon-Sirianni, participating. So we do have a lot of our partners participating on this today. And if I did forget anybody, my apologies, but I tried to scan the list quickly. Well, thank you very much to all of our panelists for participating in this session. We know how busy each of you are, and so we greatly appreciate your time here. And also, just as partners and leaders in this field, we can hopefully together help to advance transportation and infrastructure investment in our region. I would also like to reiterate our sincere appreciation to our sponsors, including Rich Barkowski and the Constructors Association of Western Pennsylvania, who sponsored the panel, and their generous support that allows us to continue to work to advocate for the region. And obviously, thank you to all of our participants today. We look forward to seeing you in our next session at 10:30, which will focus a little bit more on connectivity. So if you have an interest in that issue, please do join and be back with us in about a half an hour. So thank you all and have a great day.